Hey everybody, welcome back to another beginner chess video. So in the last video we talked about the opening and some of the principles that you should be thinking about as you're beginning the game. Now we're going to talk about what happens in the middle of the game, which is, and this part of the game is not so creatively referred to as the middle game. So once you build yourself a sturdy structure, you have to have some kind of plan. You gotta have a way to win material and hopefully eventually checkmate the king. So we're gonna talk about some of the things you can be thinking about. Generally, that can be broken down into two different sort of topics. You should be thinking a lot about tactics, which are one move, aggressive plays that can result in winning material or sometimes checkmating king or winning pieces. And the other subject is slower moving plans that we can develop in the middle of the game to sort of hopefully eventually win the game, but in a more slow fashion and strategically, positionally make things happen. So let's talk about some tactics first. These are the one move things that you should be looking for, sometimes multiple move strategies that you should be looking for throughout the course of the game that can immediately win you material. The first thing we're going to talk about is a pin. So let's take a look at this position. Pinning a piece is when you move your piece in front of one piece and then it has another piece behind it. So probably a lot of times when you hear about a pin, it has to do with the king. So let's take a look at this bishop right here. So this bishop can pin this knight to the king. You see, I just moved my bishop out, attacking this knight, and behind it is the king, which means that this knight absolutely cannot move. If this knight moves, the king would be in check. See how when I move the knight out of the way, the bishop is now looking at the king, which is illegal. You can't make a move that results in a check. So white is not allowed to move this piece while the king is behind it. And that is called a pin. So we have pinned this knight to the king. So that's pretty interesting because we can attack it a lot of the time, which can be really useful. Let's say white makes a random move, moving this pawn. If black now jumps in here with the knights are looking at each other. And typically, this knight could attack this knight, but because of the pin, this knight can't move. So I'm actually attacking this piece with two different pieces now. And if white doesn't do anything about it, say white goes here, I can just take this. And the pawn happened to be defending it, so the pawn could take here, but then I could take right back, and I would end up winning a pawn. So that you can see how that pin is really useful a lot of the time. So there's an example of a pin with the king. If the queen were to move behind it, all right, so what move do I have to make here? All right, so if the queen were to move behind the knight, the queen, we would say, is now pinned because the queen is more valuable than the bishop. So the knight is pinned to the queen is how we would phrase this. Because the queen is a more powerful piece, we're still worried about this queen behind the knight. So if the knight can't move, because if the knight were to move, I'll make a black move. If the knight were to move now, the knight can legally move, but if the knight were to move, then I could just take the queen. And and whenever you're losing a queen, that's a bad time. You don't want that to happen. All right, so the next tactic we're going to talk about is a fork. And a fork is a double attack. It's when you're attacking two pieces at once. A lot of times that piece is the king. And in the example I'm looking at here, let's look at a fork of the king. So if my knight jumps to here, I am checking the king, right? Okay, so it's black's move. Let's go there. So if I move my knight to here, my knight is checking the king. I'm attacking the king. So the king's gonna have to do something about that. Some piece is gonna have to do something about this check. So the king can move, but notice I'm also attacking the rook. So this fork is super useful. When you can attack a piece and also attack the king, you a lot of times can win that piece. And this rook is undefended, so I'm just gonna take that rook. The king's gonna have to move and can come attack my knight, but I'm taking the rook, and the rook is worth 5 points. So even if I lose this knight, I'm still up material, and that's super helpful. So that's not the only type of fork that can happen, though. You can fork pieces that are not the king, and you can fork pieces with a piece that isn't a knight. A lot of times knights are really tricky, and people have a hard time seeing them, so definitely look for forks with knights. But a lot of people, especially me, I sometimes miss forks with pawns. So check this out right here. If I move this pawn up, it's defended by my bishop and another pawn, and I'm attacking both. Okay, so let's make a move with black. I'm attacking both the queen and the knight at the same time. Only one of those pieces can move, right? So even if the knight moves, I'm taking the queen. So obviously that's probably not the best move because you don't want to lose your queen. So you would probably wind up losing the queen. You would probably end up moving the queen, but if I would just take the knight, and I'm up a knight, and that's good. We like that. You know what I'm saying? So there's a couple examples of forks. There's other ways to even attack two pieces though. Let's check out this example of a double attack. So I have, another name for this is a discovered attack, which is super useful. It's when you have a piece behind another piece, and when I move this knight, my bishop will then be attacking this queen. So that's called a discovered attack, but I'm actually also attacking two pieces at once. Because look at this, when I move my knight, I'm attacking this rook, which is a high value piece, and I'm attacking the queen. So even after the discovered attack, the queen can move, but then I'm still winning a rook. So there are some circumstances where you can attack multiple pieces at once, and those are tactics. And those are the things you're going to be looking for, because that's going to win you material in the long run. So there's really important moments in the game that you're going to be looking for. So those are three of the most popular types of attacks. We have discovered attacks, we have pins, and we have forks, all of which are super useful. So keep a lookout for those, all right? Next up, we're going to be covering some of the strategies that you should be looking for during the middle game. All right, so let's dive into some middle game strategies. So there's kind of a lot of different things you can be thinking about in the middle game. The pieces can do a lot of different things. The first thing I'd like to talk about is when you're through with your opening and you've got a pretty sturdy structure. So black and white are both looking pretty sturdy here. You can start thinking about potentially exploring and taking some space. So you might notice that the black's castled on the king side, white is castled on the, black is castled on the queen side, white is castled on the king side. So opposite sides, I can take some space over here if I'm white. I can start pushing pawns towards this king, and that might get pretty scary for black. So if I push this pawn, say, then all of a sudden, my pawns are something that black has to worry about. If my pawn gets all the way up here, this pawn's going to have to figure out how to deal with it. I could screw up the pawns that are guarding the king currently. It gets pretty scary pretty fast. Okay, well, let's say black plays a random move, and then I keep taking space. So you might notice, like, black has fewer and fewer squares that it's able to move its pawns around in. But there are also downfalls to taking space, because in doing this, pawns can never move backwards. So if you move pawns forward too quickly, all of a sudden you might be creating weaknesses in your position. So this pawn is back now. This pawn is not guarded by anything, and it's behind all my other pawns, and it's also very important because it's guarding these two pawns. So if this pawn were to fall, my position would be in a lot of trouble. So you have to be watching out for weaknesses and also simultaneously looking to exploit your opponent's weaknesses. So looking for weak spots in your opponent's position that you can potentially take advantage of. And a lot of times that'll be a backwards pawn is what this is called. The pawn in the back of a chain. And they're not always easy to access, but sometimes there are a lot of different ways you can do that. Another strategy to consider when you're playing the middle game, other than taking space on the outside, is trying to attack in the center, try to blow up the center. So black actually has an opportunity to do that right now. If black pushes this pawn right here, you might notice that white has this square protected by two pieces, but black has two more pieces to protect this square as well. So a bunch of trades can happen here and open up space in the center, and oftentimes you might be able to exploit your opponent's weaknesses by doing that. So let's see what happens after all this. So pawn moves here, pawn takes. So black is down a pawn, black wins the pawn back with the horse, white takes the horse, black takes the bishop. So each player won 4 points of material there, and now there's nothing else that's under attack, really, other than this pawn by black, actually. So now black is staring directly at one of white's weaknesses that was made by trying to take some space over here, and it seems that black might even have the initiative. If black were to win this pawn, then this pawn doesn't have a protector, and you can see pretty quickly how these weaknesses can create themselves in the middle game. So you have to be very careful about how you're pushing your pawns and creating weaknesses in your own position, and looking very closely at your opponent's position to make sure you're looking for their weaknesses. In a previous video, we had talked about trying to get your rooks onto an open file. Well, in the middle game, a lot of times you can take advantage of these open files by creating something called a battery. So if I move my queen in front of my rook, I then have two powerful pieces just staring down one column at black's pieces. So let's say for the sake of demonstration that black makes this move right here, this is looking very scary for black because there's nothing protecting this except for the king, and the king isn't going to be able to take my queen if I take this pawn because my rook is protecting it. So having two pieces that are mobile that can attack the same piece is extremely powerful in chess. So you want to set up batteries when you can. If I move here, say, I won myself a pawn, and then the king has to move here, and then all of a sudden everything is falling apart because my queen can move here protected by my rook, and the king's gonna have to move here, and then I have control of all of this. I can start taking pawns. It's just really powerful to have two pieces lined up like that. So alternatively, you can also make a battery on a diagonal. So you could create a battery with a bishop and a queen, for example. So let's look at black's situation here. So we've got a bishop lined up on this diagonal, which is looking down here at what looks to be a pretty dangerous place. If I throw my queen on the same diagonal, this is looking really scary for white, because if my queen gets to here, this is going to be checkmate. So these types of batteries are honestly, some of in like lower level chess games, a lot of times this is how you'll see checkmates happen. So let's say white totally misses this fact and makes this move. Well, my bishop's under attack, but my queen can come down here and nothing is protecting the square. Once my queen gets here, that's the checkmate of the king. This king has absolutely nowhere to go. Nothing's protecting the square. My bishop is protecting, so the king can't take, and that's game over. So keep a lookout for batteries, and you should have some success. They're very powerful in the game of chess. So there's a bunch of examples of some tactics and also some strategies that you can keep in mind while you're playing. So get out there and play some games and hopefully win some, huh? Stay tuned for another video. I should have an end game video out relatively shortly. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.